The dust cloud on the horizon meant only one thing in Tascosa, Texas. In 1873, someone was riding in hard, and Tabitha Rose knew exactly who it was. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and stepped out onto the porch of her small boarding house, shielding her eyes from the setting sun as the lone figure approached. Kale Calloway was a man who rode like he was born to it, his tall frame moving in perfect harmony with his chestnut stallion. Dust caked his denim pants and the bottom of his long coat, but somehow he always managed to look commanding, even covered in the grit of the trail. His weathered face broke into a smile when he spotted her, and he tipped his hat in that way that still made her heart flutter after 3 months of knowing him. "Miss Rose," he called, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Looks like I've made it just in time for supper." Tabitha couldn't help but smile. "You always seem to know when the biscuits are coming out of the oven, Mr. Calloway." "It's a gift," he replied, leading his horse to the water trough. "That and the fact that your boarding house serves the best meals in 3 counties." Tabitha watched him tend to his horse before coming up the steps. At 32, Kale Calloway had the reputation of being one of the most respected ranchers in the area. He'd built his spread from nothing, they said, arriving in Tascosa 5 years ago with nothing but determination and cattle-driving skills. Now his Circle C ranch employed a dozen men and was growing every season. "How was the cattle drive to Dodge?" she asked, holding the door open for him. "Profitable," he answered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. His dark hair was matted with sweat, and lines of exhaustion creased the corners of his eyes. "Though I'm mighty glad to be back in Tascosa." "You look like you could use a hot meal and a bath," Tabitha said, noticing the way he winced slightly as he moved. "Trouble on the trail?" "Nothing worth mentioning, just the usual bandit storms and ornery steers." He smiled, but she could tell there was more to the story. "Supper's in an hour. That gives you time to wash up. I've kept your usual room ready." His eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary. "You're too good to me, Tabitha." When he said her name like that, it took considerable effort to maintain her composure. At 26, Tabitha had long given up on the notion of romance. She'd arrived in Tascosa 2 years ago, a widow with nothing but determination and the skills her mother had taught her in the kitchen. The little boarding house had been her salvation, purchased with the last of her savings and built into a respectable establishment through sheer force of will. An hour later, the small dining room buzzed with conversation. Tabitha's 5 regular boarders, 2 railroad surveyors, the town's schoolteacher, an aging prospector, and the young clerk from the mercantile were already seated when Kale came downstairs, hair still damp from his bath. He took his usual place at the end of the table, and Tabitha couldn't help but notice how the other men deferred to him, despite his quiet manner. There was something about Kale Calloway that commanded respect without asking for it. As she served her famous beef stew and biscuits, she felt his eyes on her more than once. It had been this way for weeks now, stolen glances, lingering conversations on the porch after the others had retired, his visits to town becoming more frequent than his ranch business required. "Miss Rose," called Mr. Harrington, the older of the 2 surveyors, "this stew would make a king jealous of his own royal cook." "Thank you kindly," she replied, feeling a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "It's not just the cooking that makes this place special," Kale added quietly. "It's the cook herself." The table fell silent for a moment before erupting in good-natured chuckles and knowing glances. Tabitha busied herself with serving, hoping the heat in her cheeks wasn't as visible as it felt. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the boarders had dispersed to their evening activities, Tabitha found herself alone with Kale on the front porch. The Texas night had settled in, bringing with it a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "You never did tell me the real trouble on the trail," she said, settling into the rocking chair beside him. Kale's jaw tightened. "We ran into some trouble near the Red River, lost 2 men. Oh, Kale, I'm so sorry. Raiders hit us at dawn. Young Billy took a bullet meant for me." His voice was steady, but she could see the guilt etched in his features. He was just 19. Tabitha reached across the space between them and placed her hand on his arm. "You can't blame yourself." "Can't I? I'm the one who hired him, knowing he was green as spring grass." And I suspect you're the one who's bringing his wages to his family, Kale nodded, looking out at the darkening street. His ma's a widow in Amarillo, no other children. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic creaking of the rocking chairs the only sound besides the distant piano from the saloon 2 streets over. I've been thinking, Tabitha, Kale finally said, his deep voice quiet in the evening stillness. I've been coming to your boarding house for months now, and I think we both know it's not just for the biscuits. Tabitha's heart began to race. Is that so, Mr. Calloway? It is. He turned to face her, his expression serious. I find myself riding into town with no real business, just hoping to see your face. I find myself thinking about you when I should be thinking about cattle prices or water rights. And what do you aim to do about that? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Well, I aim to court you properly if you'll allow it. The simplicity of his declaration took her breath away. Kale, you don't need to answer right now, he interrupted gently. Just think on it. I'm not a man who speaks without meaning, Tabitha. When I say I want to court you, I mean it with everything I have. 2 weeks later, Tascosa was buzzing with the news that Kale Calloway was officially courting the widow who ran the boarding house. Tabitha found herself the subject of curious glances and knowing smiles as she did her shopping at the general store. Miss Rose, called Martha Wilson, the proprietor's wife, I hear congratulations might be in order soon. People certainly do talk in this town, Tabitha replied with a smile, selecting a bolt of blue calico. Well, when the most eligible rancher in the county starts bringing wildflowers to a lady every other day, folks are bound to notice, Martha winked. He's a good man, Kale Calloway. Strong, fair, and kind to those who work for him. Yes, he is, Tabitha agreed, unable to suppress her smile. That evening, Kale took her for a ride outside of town. They followed the Canadian River until they reached a grassy knoll overlooking the water, where cottonwoods provided dappled shade. I wanted to show you something, Kale said, helping her down from her horse. He led her to the edge of the bluff, where the river curved elegantly around a bend. What do you see? Tabitha gazed out at the landscape. The setting sun painted the plains in hues of gold and amber, while the river reflected the deepening blue of the sky. In the distance, she could make out a cluster of buildings that must be part of Kale's ranch. I see beauty, she said honestly. I see possibility, he replied. When I first came here, I had nothing but my horse, my saddle, and a dream. Now I look out at this land and I see a future. He turned to her, taking her hands in his. I'd like that future to include you, Tabitha. Her heart swelled with emotion, but the familiar shadow of doubt crept in. Kale, there's something I need to tell you before this goes any further, his brow furrowed with concern. Whatever it is, we can face it together. Tabitha took a deep breath. After my husband died, I became very ill with a fever, the doctor in St. Louis said. He said I would never be able to have children. The words tumbled out in a rush, and she couldn't meet his eyes. I know most men want a family, heirs to carry on their name and work. I can't give you that. For a long moment, Kale was silent, and Tabitha's heart sank. Then his gentle fingers tilted her chin up until she had no choice but to look into his eyes. Tabitha Rose, he said softly, do you think that matters to me, doesn't it? Your ranch, your legacy would mean nothing without the right woman by my side. He drew her closer. I fell in love with you, not with some notion of what you could provide me. Tears welled in her eyes. But children, there are more ways to build a family than just having babies, Kale said firmly. There are children who need homes, love, guidance. Like young Billy's cousins, who are now alone in the world, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I can't bear children. The cowboy held her close. Then we'll love who we have. The simplicity and certainty in his voice broke something open inside her, and tears flowed freely down her cheeks. Kale held her against his chest, one hand gently stroking her hair as the sun continued its descent behind the distant hills. When her tears subsided, he produced a small leather pouch from his pocket. I was going to wait, but I think now is the right time. He opened it and withdrew a simple gold band. This was my mother's. Before she died, she made me promise I'd only give it to a woman with a heart as big as the Texas sky. His voice grew husky with emotion. I can't think of anyone who fits that description better than you. Kale, Tabitha began, but he placed a finger gently against her lips. Marry me, Tabitha Rose. Be my wife, my partner, the mistress of Circle C Ranch. Help me build something that will last, whatever form it takes." When his lips met hers, Tabitha felt as if every lonely moment, every heartache, every doubt had been leading her to this place, this man, this life they would forge together. "Yes," she whispered against his mouth. "Yes, I will marry you." The wedding was held 6 weeks later on a perfect autumn day. The entire town of Tascosa turned out for the occasion, along with ranchers from miles around. Judge Parker performed the ceremony in the small white church, and afterward, the celebration spilled out onto the town square. Tabitha wore a cream-colored dress that Martha Wilson had helped her sew, with lace salvaged from her mother's wedding gown. Kale looked resplendent in a new black suit, his normally unruly hair tamed for the occasion. As they danced under the stars to the music of fiddles and harmonicas, Kale whispered in her ear, "Mrs. Calloway, I believe this is the beginning of our greatest adventure." "I believe you're right, Mr. Calloway," she replied, her heart full to bursting with joy. Their first months at Circle C Ranch were a whirlwind of activity. Tabitha threw herself into running the household with the same dedication she'd shown at her boarding house. The ranch hands, initially wary of having a woman in their midst, quickly came to appreciate her cooking and her no-nonsense approach to life on the frontier. Kale's foreman, a grizzled man named Samuel Tucker who'd been with him since the beginning, became one of Tabitha's strongest allies. "Never seen the boss so happy," he confided one evening as she brought coffee to the men after supper. "Place feels more like a home now, instead of just somewhere to sleep between cattle drives." Winter settled over the plains with a vengeance that year. December brought blizzards that howled around the sturdy log walls of their home, but inside, warmth and contentment reigned. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the crackling fire, Kale presented Tabitha with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the smooth cedar. "Open it and see," he urged, his eyes alight with anticipation. Inside was a folded document. As she read it, her hands began to tremble. "Kale, is this?" "It's done," he confirmed. "Billy's cousins James and Elizabeth Thompson, their aunt in Amarillo can't keep them anymore. The paperwork just came through. They'll be arriving on the stage next week." Tabitha stared at him, tears filling her eyes. "You've adopted them." "We've adopted them," he corrected gently. "If you'll have them, that is, James is 12 and Elizabeth is 9. They've had a rough go of it since their parents died of cholera last year." "Of course we'll have them," Tabitha whispered, clutching the papers to her chest. "Oh, Kale, this is the most wonderful gift." He gathered her in his arms. "I meant what I said that day by the river. There are many ways to build a family." The arrival of James and Elizabeth Thompson transformed the Circle C Ranch in ways Tabitha couldn't have imagined. The children were quiet at first, wary and grief-stricken, having lost so much in their young lives. James, tall for his age with serious brown eyes, appointed himself his sister's protector. Elizabeth, small and fair-haired, rarely spoke above a whisper for the first few weeks. Tabitha's heart ached for them, but she knew from her own experience that grief couldn't be rushed. She set about making them feel secure in small ways: favorite foods, comfortable beds with colorful quilts, a space of their own in the large ranch house. Kale, to Tabitha's amazement, revealed a patience she hadn't known he possessed. He invited James to accompany him on his daily rounds of the ranch, teaching him about cattle and horses without pressuring the boy to talk. For Elizabeth, he carved a family of small wooden animals: horses, cows, and a mother and father sheep watching over 2 lambs. The spring thaw brought with it the first signs that the children were beginning to heal. James started asking questions about ranching, his natural curiosity breaking through his reserve. Elizabeth's whispers gave way to actual conversation, and one memorable morning, Tabitha was awakened by the sound of the little girl's laughter as she helped Kale feed the chickens. "You're a natural with them," Tabitha told her husband that night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset after the children had gone to bed. "It's easy to love them," Kale replied simply. "They're good kids who have had more than their share of sorrow. Like us," she said softly. He nodded, taking her hand. "Like us. Maybe that's why we understand each other." Summer brought another change to Circle C Ranch. Samuel Tucker rode in one evening with news from town: 3 children had been orphaned when their parents' wagon overturned at a river crossing. With no relatives to claim them, the town council was at a loss for what to do. Tabitha and Kale exchanged a single glance before Kale said, "Bring them here, Samuel, at least until something permanent can be arranged." The Walsh children, Thomas, Mary, and baby Joseph, arrived the next day, dirty and frightened. Thomas, at 7, had tried to be brave for his 5-year-old sister and infant brother, but his thin shoulders sagged with relief when Tabitha took the fussing baby from his arms. "You're safe now," she assured them, ushering them into the house where a hot meal and bath awaited. "You can rest." That night, with 3 additional children under their roof, Tabitha found Kale standing in the doorway of the improvised nursery, watching the sleeping forms. "It's getting crowded in here," he observed quietly. "Yes," she agreed, slipping her arm around his waist. "But there's still room in our hearts, isn't there?" His kiss was answer enough. The temporary arrangement for the Walsh children became permanent as the weeks passed. James and Elizabeth, no longer the newest arrivals, took it upon themselves to help the younger children adjust. Elizabeth appointed herself baby Joseph's special guardian, while James showed Thomas the ropes of ranch life. By harvest time, Circle C Ranch had become home to 5 children ranging in age from 6 months to 13 years. The ranch house, once so spacious for just 2 people, now buzzed with activity from dawn till dusk. Kale added 2 new rooms, and Tabitha enlisted the help of the neighboring women to sew clothes and bedding for their expanding family. Word spread about the Calloways and their open hearts. The local newspaper ran a story about the couple who were building a family of love on the Texas plains. Letters began to arrive from across the territory, people inquiring if they might consider one more child, a niece whose parents had died of typhoid, a nephew orphaned by an Indian attack. "We can't save them all," Kale said regretfully one evening as they read yet another letter. "No," Tabitha agreed, "but we can help others to do what we're doing." An idea had been forming in her mind for some time. What if we established a proper orphanage in Tascosa, with a school and everything children need? Kale considered this, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "It would take money, land, teachers. All things we either have or can find," Tabitha pointed out. "The Millers have that big property on the edge of town they've been trying to sell, and I've been putting aside some of the profits from the cattle sales." "Have you now?" Kale raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And here I thought you were saving for a new dress or something frivolous like that." She swatted his arm playfully. "I've never been frivolous a day in my life, Kale Calloway, and you know it." He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. "No, but you are the most generous soul I've ever known. If you want to build an orphanage, then that's what we'll do." The Tascosa Home for Children opened its doors the following spring. The former Miller property had been transformed into a cheerful building with dormitories, classrooms, a dining hall, and ample grounds for play. Tabitha had personally overseen every detail, from the colorful quilts on each bed to the library stocked with books donated by communities as far away as Denver. On opening day, as they prepared to welcome the first 12 children who would live there, Kale found Tabitha standing alone in the main hallway, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, alarmed, having second thoughts. She shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Happy thoughts. I was just remembering what the doctor told me in St. Louis, that I would never have children. He was wrong, wasn't he? I have more children than I ever dreamed possible." Kale wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on top of her head. "That doctor had a very limited definition of motherhood. You've been proving him wrong every day since we met." The years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. James, their oldest, grew into a tall, confident young man who inherited Kale's gift with horses and cattle. At 18, he became the youngest foreman in Circle C history when Samuel Tucker finally retired. Elizabeth, beautiful and kind-hearted, became a teacher at the orphanage after completing her education in Denver. The Walsh children thrived as well. Thomas discovered a talent for carpentry and opened his own shop in Tascosa. Mary revealed a beautiful singing voice that led to her performing at social gatherings across the territory. And baby Joseph, no longer a baby at 9, showed Kale's determination and Tabitha's compassion in equal measure. Through it all, their love for each other only deepened. Kale's hair began to silver at the temples, and lines of laughter etched themselves around Tabitha's eyes, but when they looked at each other, they saw the same people who had fallen in love on that boarding house porch so many years ago. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Kale took Tabitha back to the bluff overlooking the river where he had proposed. They rode out at dawn, just the two of them, something that rarely happened with their busy lives. "Remember when I asked what you saw when you looked at this view?" He asked as they stood side by side watching the sun rise over the plains. "You said you saw possibility," she recalled, leaning against his solid warmth. "And now I see fulfillment," he said softly, "everything I dreamed of and more." Tabitha turned to face him, taking in the beloved features of his face, older now, weathered by sun and wind, but still so handsome it made her heart ache. "If someone had told me 20 years ago that a barren widow would find this kind of happiness, I would never have believed them. Good thing I never put much stock in what other people say is possible," Kale replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I've always preferred to see for myself. Is that why you kept coming back to my boarding house even when the whole town was betting you'd never settle down?" She teased, "That, and I really did like your biscuits." He grinned before growing serious again. "But mostly it was because from the moment I met you I knew you were someone special, someone worth changing my whole life for. Was it worth it?" She asked, suddenly needing to hear the words, even after all these years. Kale's answer was to draw her into his arms and kiss her with all the passion of their youth and all the depth of their years together. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Every single day has been worth it," Tabitha Calloway. "Every joy, every sorrow, every child we've loved our own and those who have passed through our care. I wouldn't change a single moment of our life together." That evening, they returned to a home filled with their children, grandchildren, and former orphanage residents who considered the Calloways their family. A surprise anniversary celebration had been arranged, with food, music, and reminiscences that lasted well into the night. As Kale and Tabitha stood on their porch watching the last of their guests depart, he slipped his arm around her waist. "Not bad for two people who couldn't have children, wouldn't you say?" Tabitha looked up at the star-filled Texas sky, then back at the man who had changed her life with his steadfast love and unfailing belief in possibilities. "Not bad at all," she agreed, her heart as full as the harvest moon rising over the plains. "In fact, I'd say it's just about perfect."